Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to our next session of reading Machiavelli's Prince. In this session, we will be looking at chapter 11, Ecclesiastical Principates. Now, with chapter 11, we come to the end of what we call the first, what I and what some of my teachers told me was the first kind of part of the Prince, which kind of completes the thing that he's this kind of sketch to some degree, this thing he sketches out in chapter 1. This is a regime that he doesn't mention. He didn't mention it in 1. Ecclesiastical Principates is a very interesting. This is a weird chapter. What is meant by Ecclesiastical Principates? Well, because in the Middle Ages, the church got a hold, was ruling some states. Okay, Vatican itself was when Pippin, the king of the Franks, came to help the Pope because he wanted to get the Pope to recognize his heir to be the emperor of the Roman Empire of the West, right? Which became the Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne, right? But Pippin frees the Pope and gives him, some territory around the Vatican, and this became the Papal States, right? Then over time, various land aristocratic territories, usually that sometimes when a barony or an estate was inherited by the son who went into the church, or didn't, or was the inheritor. There was no other heir. They gave it to the church as their will, rather than that the prince or someone else grabs hold of it. The church got control over estates, including some estates that became political states, principalities. There's in the Holy Roman Emperor, some of the larger duchies and territories, principalities, were controlled by the church, and usually controlled by an archbishop or sometimes even a cardinal archbishop. And what sometimes even happened, these cardinal archbishoprics kind of I think Linz was one. I'm trying to remember. Prague was one. Prague was one of these things at one time in its time. And what happened? Prague was under. Prague itself was part of a large one. I think it's Bohemian. I'm just kind of talking here to kind of make a point about them. These were states or territories, political territories, within the Holy Roman Empire, or in that includes, at one time, even though Italy wasn't part of the Holy Roman Empire, it was kind of part of it at one time. It got its independence. The cities of Italy kind of broke away from the Roman Empire. And the same thing with France. France was part of it. In other words, the Italy and France, the only thing that stayed within the Holy Roman Empire was the German states and the Netherlands. And these German states became the Holy Roman Empire. Now, in these German states, and actually even in some of the French, in Italy, what happened was that the church would get control over this political entity, the principality, this duchy, or some state like that. So not necessarily the kingdoms. The kingdoms tended not to go that way, but the duchies and and sometimes some similar type units were eventually the succession went to the church. And what happened was, therefore, sometimes whoever was appointed, appointed bishop there. Sometimes that became hereditary, weirdly, and how that can happen with priests who are not supposed to marry, right? But these are in fact, this is some of the, this is what the importance of the and talk about the Ramaya, those papal states. Many of those states, even though the prince that the ruler or head of that barony or that count may not be a churchman, they often had the children be churchmen. So particularly second son or third sons become churchmen, so that they would influence the church. Okay, so therefore this is why. And sometimes what would happen would be that the principal heir would become the churchman, and then once that happened, the church tended to keep control over the entity. Okay, so this is what a ecclesiastical principality is. Okay, I want to give some background on it so we understand. This chapter again is five. We're using the D'Alvarez translation again. It's 5 paragraphs long. It's the text is on page 60, page 66 and ends in 68. In 69. Sorry, 68. 68. Sorry, it's 3 pages. 3 pages. The notes begin at the end of 68 and go to the top line of 70. There are 10 notes on this because he deals with that. Let us look at it. He goes, there only remains at the present to reason of ecclesiastical principates, whose difficulty all arise before they're possessed. Okay, now I'm going to stop here because there's a footnote, principalities, right? Footnote 1. And he gives the discussion of these elsewhere. He discusses this at Discourses, part 1, chapters, book 1, chapters 11 and 12, in book 2, the preface, and in chapters 2 and 5, in book 3, chapters 1, okay? And also, again, a little bit in the Prince, chapter 19, and especially footnote 10. So this is what the idea of these principates. He will discuss them. He'll again discuss them because they're a weird thing. They arise and all the difficulties arise before they're possessed, for they are acquired either by virtue or fortune, and are maintained without either. For these are sustained by the ancient orders of religion, which have been so powerful, and are such quality, that they keep their princes in state, in whatever mode they proceed and live. These alone have states which they do not defend, and subjects they do not govern. And these states, by not being defended, are never taken away, and subjects not being governed never care. They never think of alienating themselves from their princes, nor could they do so if they thought of it. Only these princes are secure and happy. Now this is a very funny thing. These are what? These are territories that are neither governed. Now listen, go look at this very carefully. The princes in these, in other words, these things, these principates, are sustained by ancient orders of religion. So the religion maintains it. So that it's maintained because of religion. That's one. And which have become so powerful and of such quantities as that they keep their princes in state, whatever mode those princes proceed to live. In other words, they can live desolate lives. They can have virtue, no lack virtue. They can just doesn't matter. How they proceed, how they govern, and how they live their lives. Okay. In other words, it's contrary to the other regimes, where those things matter most. Here in this regime, that really doesn't matter. And he continues in that same paragraph. These alone have states which they do not defend, and subjects which they do not govern. They don't defend, they govern. and these states not being defended are never taken away. Okay, that's even more. They're not defended. You don't defend them. You don't. And you don't govern the subjects that much, or govern the subjects, and no one bothers to take them because they're never taken away. Either this is very weird, right? This is talking about this. And the subjects are not being governed, never care. So they never care about this. They never think of alienating themselves from their princes, nor could they if they thought of it. So they don't think of doing it, nor could they if they thought of it. They could not alienate themselves from their princes. Only these princes then are secure. Only these princes are absolutely secure. This is a very odd thing to say in that sense. It's puzzling. One would think this would be a good idea. This is a good state. Well, then he should praise be praising the Pope, right? The Pope, but he doesn't praise the Pope. He's very condemning of the church and its role. And the church has a political unit, it's not religion. That's not that. Be careful. Some people are, he's against religion. No, he has nothing wrong. Religion can be good or bad. What's wrong is the role of the Pope and the church as it is constituted because of the papacy and how the papacy behaved towards the world. In other words, he's kind of suspicious of the church in that sense. In this way, now some people argue that he's this kind of Lutheran. This is interesting. Machiavelli's criticism of the church is happening around the same time as the beginning of the real Reformation by Luther. Luther's Reformation and the Machiavelli Prince are around the same point in time. What is it? Okay, the Prince was written around, we know from the letter of Bareilles' letter, that was 1513. So the Prince was written around 1512 to 1514, remember, he dies, Machiavelli dies in 1527. So 15, 13, 15, 13, 12, around that time. It's printed originally after his death in 1532 by Antonio Blado Diasola's publishing house. So that's the first day of the Prince. But so therefore, this is written at a time, that moment. So Machiavelli dies in 1527. So so Machiavelli's clearly contemporary of Luther, who lived from born 1483 and died 1546. So they die Luther dies a decade later. But the famous incident of the Luther at putting the theses on the Wittenberg cathedral door is October 31st, 1517, and by the 18, it's all by 1518, it's all over the place, and Worms will be, when is Worms? Worms will be 21. April, May 21. Okay, sorry, the event was 28th January to 25th May, and that he will be Luther will be at Worms. Right, this is where he gives his that famous line. So, if we look at this from that point of view, we have that Machiavelli's Prince and Machiavelli's moment at a time of this Reformation is just at around the same time. So that we have to understand that as in many ways Machiavelli's criticism will echo some of the other criticisms that many of the reformers had against the church, and this idea of the power of the church and its functioning of this thing. This is so let us continue here. Second paragraph. But since these stand by a superior cause, the superiority which cause the human mind cannot grasp, I shall leave off speaking of them. And since they are exalted and maintained by God, it would be the office of a presumptuous and bold man to discuss them. But then again, he is a presumptuous and bold man. I apologize. He is a presumptuous and bold man. So he's saying it will be to discuss them, but he says he's not going to discuss them. What's footnote 2, and the Alvarez makes a big thing of this on page 60. It starts the very end of 67 and 68. He says about the translation of this line, "Mi ascendo crenda rende de capacio superiorda." I have attempted to preserve Machiavelli's use of the singular case of Casonia, together with the adjective superior in the plural. Machiavelli is saying that the ecclesiastical principates are held by a superior cause, or it is by superior causes. In other words, is it held by a superior cause or by superior causes? He wishes, it would seem, to have it both ways. Again, Machiavelli does it both ways. I interpret his grammatical error as a desire to indicate that the one cause of the biblical tradition is, in a certain respect, to be equated with the many divine causes of the Gentile tradition, that is, with the many gods of the pagan. Thus, the superiority of either cause or causes is equally inaccessible to the human mind. So this is the Alvarez talking about Machiavelli plays how he does something. There's a grammar error. The subject of these two terms are not in agreement. There's an agreement error where he has that line, or it should be, in other words, the superiority of the cause and the human mind cannot grasp. In other words, there's an agreement error in grammar, and that Machiavelli's trying to have it both ways. And this is what the Alvarez is arguing. I think he's right here. There's something playful here. There's a playfulness here, and it's presumptuous. Nevertheless, if someone demanded of me how it came to be that the church came to such greatness in temporal affairs, since one finds that prior to Alexander, the Italian potentates, and not only those who are called potentates, but even barons and lords, no matter how petty, so little esteemed her in the temporal, and now a king of France trembles before her, and she has been made to drive him from Italy and ruin the Venetians. Even through all of this is well known, it does not seem to me superfluous to recall a good part of it to memory. In other words, you're reading this now. Now we're reading it. It's not current, but when he's writing this, it's current, and he wants to remind people what happened. In other words, the church before, everyone, no one had respect for the church as the political power of the church by this time when he's writing. This is not the famous case of the Pope and the emperor, who's cost the emperor had to kind of humiliate himself in order to not to lose support of, after being excommunicated. This is not the church came to be not well respected, particularly the papacy is not well respected. You have to look at this. The papacy was a very weak and political entity, and then both under Alexander and later Julius and Leo, it becomes a leading power, and And this is something to be wondered. Now, in the third paragraph, he goes, before Charles, King of France, passed through Italy, this province was under the Imperium of the Pope, the Venetians, the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. So this province, this area, was under the Imperium of the Pope, the Duke of the Venetians, the Kings of Naples. These were the players. He says Italy was in the hands of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major powers. These potentates had to have two principal cares. One, that a foreigner not enter Italy with arms, and the other, that among themselves, no one among themselves seize more state. In other words, that the other parties don't get more states under their. But this was a balancing act. No foreigners, and don't bring no foreigners coming in, and these guys don't gain it. The 5 of these states keep their relative power towards each other. Okay. Those of whom they've had to take the most care were the Pope and the Venetians. In other words, of the other states, the Pope and the Venetian had to be looked out for. And to restrain the Venetians, all the others had to unite, as occurred in the defense of Ferrara. The Roman barons served to keep the Pope down. In other words, the barons around Rome. The barons around Rome, all the baronial states, the baronies around Rome, kept the papacy down, kept the papacy weak. Little cough. Hope it's not COVID. Oh no. No. So they keep the barony, and since they were divided into 2 factions, the Orsini and the Colones, there was always a cause of disruption between them. But standing with arms in hand before the eyes of the pontiff, they kept the pontiff weak and infirm. So these 2 factions that that talks about, and remember how it's Caesarea, who is Alexander's son, who is himself a churchman, will do what? He will knock these factions out. You take one out, and then use one to take the other out, and then eliminate the other and all the other ones, right? And, as we talked about in the chapter on the chapter on fortune, a prince, in other words, getting a prince by fortune in the arms of others. So these 2 factions are the things that and their arms kept the Pope weak. And although a spirited Pope rose up at times, like Sixtus, yet neither fortune nor wisdom could ever release him from these incommodities. In other words, spirited popes like Sixtus before Alexander could rise up, but the fact that these 2 factions had their might, the barons and the 2 factions of the barons, the barons led, kept the Pope in check. And that even though a spirited Pope might come up and try to play it, but never was, he uses that word, incommodities. And the brevity of their lives was the cause. For in 10 years, which is on the average the length of a Pope's reign, he might with difficulty put down one of the factions. And if, for instance, he had almost extinguished the Colonnas, another Pope rose up hostile to the Orsini, would permit the Colonnas to recover, and the Orsini would not be in time to extinguish them. This is what made the temporal forces of the Pope to be so little esteemed in Italy. In other words, the papacy kept on changing, and they would change sides, and they'd change their attitudes. That one Pope would have an attitude towards against one, and then the other against the other, and and because of that, neither was able to wipe out the other one, and it was a continuous situation, a deadlock. Now we read to the fourth paragraph. Then Alexander the Fourth rose up, who of all pontiff that has ever been, showed how much a pope with money and with forces could prevail. With Duke Valentino, Cesare Borgia, as his instrument, and the passage of the French into Italy as the occasion, he did all those things which I have discussed above with respect to the actions of the Duke. So the Duke's action, in other words, the Duke's actions aren't really the Duke's action that he's saying here. That's even more interesting. It's Alexander. Or is Alexander the Duke the same? You know, that's Alexander and Cesare the same. We have to remember Cesare exists and has all his power and might because of success. Pardon. So therefore, this is why this happens. Now, and although his intent might not have been to make the church great, but rather the Duke. In other words, that's Alexander's goal, was to make the Duke great, the Duke, his son, great. But what he did, nevertheless, gave rise to the greatness of the church. In other words, so Alexander's plottings and things like this, even though they might have been, the intent of it was not to make the church great, but to make his son great, all he did was make the church great because after he died, Cesare could not maintain it, and the new pope would just basically dispose of Cesare, Julius, and Julius, Julius was kind of a Cesare himself. If Alexander didn't necessarily go fight, but it had Cesare as his instrument, Cesare as his instrument. Julius himself fought. The images, the pictures of him in armor, right? That's this image of the image of Julius as the Pope in armor. Okay. Please forgive the engine sound if you hear it. I'm coughing because a little bit of the air is getting kind of a little stuffy because that door is shut and the circulation isn't on. So, and I think they're doing something next door in the corridor yesterday, so that there's a little bit of things, dust in the air. So we left in this sense that Alexander has had all these things ready, and that and he continues with Alexander's death and the extinction of the Duke, because when Alexander died, the new pope didn't recognize the Duke as the Duke. The church became heir to his toils. Then came Pope Julius, and he founded the church great. He found the church great, for she had now possessed all the Romalia. The barons of Rome were extinguished, and the blows struck by Alexander had annihilated the factions, and moreover, he found the way open to a mode of accumulating money which previous to Alexander had never been used. Now this is an interesting point. In other words, this is a tax. In other words, a tax of 1/10 was imposed on Christendom by a papal bull in 1500, ostensibly for the Crusades against Turk. Alexander had also made cardinals pay for their offices. He claimed the right to confiscate the wealth of those cardinals who died. Now, but Machiavelli here seems to be referring, however, those taxes, those things that did happen. He's referring to the sales of indulgences and ecclesiastical offices. And Julius and Leo will use indulgences. And remember, it's indulgences is what lead to Luther's rebellion. It was Tetzel who was collecting money for the Pope, and also the Archbishop. Again, for the sake of the Pope, to pay off the Pope. It's Tinsel's selling of indulgences, which sparked Luther's anger and the 95 Theses that led to the Reformation as a response to indulgences and the abuses of ecclesiastical activities. So it's this unique way of this is that will, produce the occasion of the Reformation, and therefore, what then? In other words, popes before Alexander never used these mechanisms, and even Alexander himself, Julius, never did indulgences to this way. So therefore, indulgences which were common, the act of an indulgence was given. It was done for church officials, church officials who were doing political things and things that might cause them to do something that would break their vows. Therefore, this was the real origin of the original concept of indulgence. It was a mechanism because churchmen were often state actors, and their duties required them to do things that might make them break their vows and or commit acts that would otherwise would be considered sinful, but they were required by their obligation. And therefore, this was a mechanism that they would get this. Okay, because we are requiring you to do this. Therefore, you're forgiven for these things you're going to do. That's where the origins of the indulgences came from in the church. But they weren't sold. Now, what happens is, following Julius and later Leo will use these as mechanisms to raise money. Particularly, and they can do so where the states are weak, particularly Germany. So therefore, all this money goes right to the Vatican, right to the Pope, and therefore it allows him to do his endeavors. So this leads us to the final paragraph here. These things Julius not only continued but increased. In other words, the thing that Alexander just tried out, these weird taxes and these selling of offices, and selling for indulgences. Not only did Julius continue, he increased, and not only he increased, and Leo increased even more. And he thought to gain Bologna for himself, and extinguish the Venetians, and chase the French out of Italy. He succeeded in all these enterprises, and much to his praise. All these things were done to increase the church, and not any private man. In other words, this is another thing. Julius is not doing it for his own. Julius is doing this enterprise in a sense. He did it for the church. He was doing these things in a kind of way not to make himself or his son. Like Alexander did this for his son. Alexander was doing these things to help advance his son, his family. Julius was actually more devout in this sense. And therefore, there is this weird sense that he was doing it for this faction. Now, and he says, continues, this is the next sentence. He also kept the Orsini and Corsini factions within the same limits where he found them, exterminated, in other words. And although there were some leaders among them who wanted from time to time to rebel, two things restrained them. One, the greatness of the church, which dismayed them, and the other, not having cardinals of their own. For the cardinals are the origin of the tumults among the Roman factions. In other words, after... How can I say this? Alexander and Cesare eliminated the two major factions, and also they eliminated them by killing off their leaders, who were the cardinals, and by denying the Roman barons cardinals, their appointment of their men as cardinals, and controlling who's the cardinals more, and selling who's a cardinal. For support and loyalty. like hence, like Alexander did for, like, remember, to get more support. Not only did he help the French king with his marriage, he helped. He gave the French archbishop a cardinaldom, and he will do similar things with the Spanish. This is how he buys. He uses. He doesn't do it for the money per se. He does it for the influence. Where other popes will do it for the money, the influence as well as the money. Leo will do it mostly for the money because he needs the money. This is the line, right? And because that's the word. And therefore, if the barons don't have cardinals, they can't create factions in picking the next pope or distributing the pope in that sense. Whenever they have cardinals, these factions will never remain quiet. For these cardinals nourish factions in Rome and elsewhere, and the barons are then forced to defend them. So, in other words, the cardinals are the cause of the factional conflict. The barons who protect them and are there to protect their interests in the Vatican. The cardinals will make, not only in Rome, cause problems, but also elsewhere by their influencing other aspects of the church. Thus, from the ambitions of the prelates arise all the discord and tumults among the barons. In other words, the Roman barons are only trouble because of the churchmen. The church and the fights of the church and the ambitions of the churchmen will lead to the barons causing a rebellion against in the papal states. He continues, thus Holiness Pope Leo then founded his pontificate most powerful, and one hopes that if his predecessors made her great with arms, he, with his goodness and infinite other virtue, will make her very great and venerated. Now this is a little bit of kiss ass, because who's Leo? Leo is a Medici. He's one of the Medici lead family, the head of the clan fam. And it would be Leo who also helps make sure that with the forces of the church, force that will undo the Florentine Republic and restore the Medici for the Florentines, head of Florence. Now remember, this is dedicated. He's writing this. The argument in one level is he's writing this to curry favor a little bit with the. So how much he means this, how much is this praise really true? But Leo is also the Pope who ends up causing the Reformation. Now, and the Reformation is now this is written before the full fledge of the Reformation hits, right? Machiavelli should know about what's going on in Germany, what's going on with Luther by the time the indulgent crisis happens. And it's Leo who leaves the church broken, in that sense, bankrupt. So he inherits a powerful thing, but he spends it on, he ends up spending it on things like, attempts to make St. Peter's and all these great things of spending on things, and not really takes care of things. He wants to make St. Peter's and these things to make it much better, but ends up spending in many ways later Machiavelli could have a very strong critique on what Leo could have done if you read Machiavelli's discussion of liberality later, you'll have this. Now here we'll end today at this point here. This is where the Ecclesiastical Principates is. Now, what's interesting, the greatest piece there is another Ecclesiastical Principate that he doesn't talk about. That is the Turk. The Turk, which he has talked about earlier. The Ottoman Empire. That is not a secular state. He is a man of God, a man of the religion. He is a cleric. In other words, the Ottoman regime is ruled by clerics. Okay, and the officers, it's a clerical regime. It is an ecclesiastical principate. Now, instead, he focuses on Rome, because he is, and I think this is because of the role of Rome in Italy, and this is why I suspect that it has. This is not mentioned, even though the Turk is talked about. I hope this ends it today. If you like, this also ends the first part of the analysis of the structuring of reading the Prince. We've covered it. Next time we come, we'll talk about chapter 12, 13 and 14 in a different section, which deals with a new theme of arms. And we will address that then. If you liked what you've heard today, or first of all, if you have any comments, please put the comments there, or go to my social media and contact me if you don't want to make it public below. Please put your comments there. If you liked what you see, like it and share it. If you want to see more, please do subscribe. I hope more people will join us and things like this. And we will continue this next time we see each other. Okay? Bye-bye.